Okay, so we are starting on Tes Vav Amud Aleph, page 15a. And in order to understand page 15a, you need to remember a few pointers, a few things that we learned in the previous page. The first thing we have to remember is that a sukkah cannot be made in a way that is invalid, and then we somehow make some small you know we decide that we're doing some that we're deciding to use it in a kosher way, and then automatically it will be kosher. Or for example, using a tree for your schach, for your roof on your sukkah, that's attached to the ground. And what do? You just sever it. So it's already put on your sukkah, let's say. You already have the branch hanging over your sukkah. And sukkah is coming around, and you have your sukkah. The only thing is that the branch is attached to the tree. And what do? You say, you know what, let me just disconnect that branch from the tree, and it'll be a kosher schach. But it was already on your sukkah before. So your sukkah is an invalid sukkah, and you're going to do some small little thing that's going to, what you're thinking is it'll validate your sukkah. And the thing the Torah tells us is, no, you have to make a kosher sukkah. You can't switch something small and say, oh, my sukkah is kosher. No, did you make it kosher? Did you make it in a kosher way? So that's a law that we learned before. It's based on the words in the Torah, ta'aseh, the word, I should say. It's based on a word that the Torah says, ta'aseh. It says, chag hasukkah is ta'aseh. You should make the sukkah, or make the holiday of Sukkot. You have to make it in a kosher way. You can't just have it and then somehow switch something around and consider it kosher. It has to be made kosher. And the scenario that we're going to be dealing with is a scenario where you're actually using your house for a sukkah. And if you're using your house for a sukkah, so all you're really doing is saying, well, I mean, I have wood as the roof. Wood, I have a wooden roof. Wood is kosher for schach, for the covering of the sukkah. So let me just use that for my sukkah. The wood is there already. So initially, when I put the wood there, I put it for a roof. But now I'm having in mind that it's there for a sukkah, for shade. So I'm having in mind that it's for shade, and it's kosher schach. I mean, it's wood. It's wood is kosher schach. That's what's my roof. My roof is wood. So maybe that should be kosher for your sukkah. And the law is no, that's not a sukkah. That's a house. And the fact that you're having in mind that you're going to be using it for schach, for shade, that doesn't do anything. It was built wrong. And the Mishnah is going to tell us ways how to get around that. What can I do now to make the wood that's on my roof as a roof? What could I do now to make it into a kosher sukkah and make it considered that I'm building a kosher sukkah? And I'm not just fixing something that's sort of like making it that it's kosher now, but it wasn't built kosher. So again, the first point that we are emphasizing is you have to build a kosher sukkah. You can't just have a sukkah that you've made kosher. It has to be built kosher. It can't be just fixed up, and you can't just make it kosherize it. You can't kosher it. That's maybe a good way
Well,
to
you can't.
term for it. You can't kosher your sukkah. You can build it kosher, but you can't just do something that'll like kosher it, fix it.
Rebbe, you can't discover a sukkah. I think is the way to do it. You can't find something that, oh, this will do. without you building it that way. But I
Right.
think the important thing with the sukkah is important to remember is that the walls themselves do not make a sukkah. You can take any walls anywhere that were built for something else, that were built anywhere. It's the schach and the roof that makes all the difference. Because otherwise, the walls are there from the house. You're not going to get rid of that. But that has nothing to do really with making the sukkah.
Right.
It's the
Yeah,
schach that makes
good
it the
point.
sukkah.
Good point. What Isaac is emphasizing is that we have to remember that when we're talking about building the sukkah, it's not so much the walls. It's the schach part that you have to build kosher. It has to be built kosher. The sukkah has to be built kosher. So that's the first point we got to know. You got to build the sukkah in a kosher way, and you can't just come afterwards and say, "Oh, well, let me do something to kosher it now. I'll just kosher it now." No, it has to be built in a kosher way. Now, there might be ways of doing it that it'll be called you're rebuilding it from, if we can figure out a way to rebuild it, fine. Then it'll be you didn't kosher it, you actually rebuilt it in some way. To what extent do you have to do that? Our Mishnah will tell us a way to rebuild the sukkah, but it's got to be built in a kosher way. That's number one. The second thing we have to remember is that we learned before that because some people might think that their house is a kosher sukkah and they have a roof, and they might think, well, my roof is what's wrong with using it's kosher schach. It's schach that's from the ground. It's not been you haven't built it into a vessel. You could say it seems like it's kosher schach. So a person might mistaken wooden boards for and think that, well, if wooden boards are kosher, then a roof is also kosher. And a person might make such a mistake. And therefore, in a previous Mishnah, we learned that, or in the previous Mishnah, we learned that there is reason to say that boards are not kosher for schach. You might think, what's wrong with boards? Boards should be kosher according to the Torah law, the letter of the law. Boards should be kosher. So in other words, you go to Home Depot, you buy a few boards, a few planks of wood, stick them on your sukkah. What's wrong with that? That grows from the ground. It's not a vessel because it's not been built into anything. It's not a receptacle. It's a board of wood. It's a plank of wood. So you might think that that should be kosher. A previous Mishnah told us, there's a problem because it looks very similar to a roof. And because it looks similar to a roof, a person might say, what's the difference between this and the roof of my house? I could dwell in my house and be considered dwelling in a kosher sukkah. So that is the second point. So again, we've got Tasev Leiman Ha'asi, which basically means that you got to build the sukkah in a kosher way. And the second thing that you need to remember is that there's a rabbinic decree. So the first thing is biblical. Biblically, you got to build the sukkah kosher. Tasev. You have to build it in a kosher way. You can't just put a branch that's from a tree on your, pull it over your sukkah, and then afterwards just sever the branch and say, well, the branch wasn't kosher before, but I've now koshered my sukkah because I severed it from the ground. The schach cannot be attached to the ground. So I'll sever it after I put it on my sukkah. I'll sever it. That is no. Also, you got to build the sukkah in a kosher way. It can't be built already and you just koshered it. And the second thing is a rabbinic decree that you can't use boards because boards are very similar to a roof. And at least according to one opinion in the previous Mishnah, you can't use boards. There was an argument there. It was a little unclear, a little vague what the case is. And we had, it was on page 14a, and we had an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, we had an opinion of Rabbi Meir, and then we have in the Gemara explaining the Mishnah, we had a whole debate of how to explain those opinions. In other words, what is the scenario? What's the case that those two opinions were referring to. So the Mishnah talked about two opinions. Can you use boards for schach? And the Gemara talked about what size were those boards that the Mishnah talks about an argument, if you could use them. What is the size of those boards? And if you remember, there was an opinion of Rav, an opinion of Shmuel, how to explain the case of the Mishnah. And the way Rav learned it, and it's important for us to remember this because it's coming up, it's going to come up here on this page 15a that we're on now. And we're starting from a fresh Mishnah, but you will need to remember the Gemara that we had on page 14a. And what we said over there was that the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda holds you're allowed to use boards for schach. You can, and we're not afraid of comparing it to a roof of a house. And Reb Meir says you cannot use boards for schach. And the Gemara explained the case in two ways. Rav's way of explaining the Mishnah was that what we're dealing with in the Mishnah is a case where the boards are 4 handbreadths. The width of those boards are 4 handbreadths. And because the width of those boards are 4 handbreadths, according to Reb Meir, it's very similar to a roof of a house. My guess is that in the olden days, they would use, for their roofs, they would put some type of plywood that was about 12 inches width, and many of those pieces of plywood would cover their house. And so the plywood that they used was 12 inches would be 4 handbreadths. And that was the normal type of planks that they would use for their roof. And so Reb Meir says, if you're going to use those same planks on your sukkah, it's going to be very similar to a house. And therefore, guess what? I hold you're not allowed to use those for schach. Rabbinically, there's a prohibition because it's similar to a roof. It's called Gezeras Tikra. That's Reb Meir's opinion. And Reb Yehuda says that I don't make such a decree. I believe that there's no problem, and I'm not afraid that people are going to make such a mistake. So it seems the way Rav learns it, very simple, that even if it's a same size as the roof size, nevertheless, people are not going to make such a mistake. So Reb Yehuda is less concerned, and Reb Meir is more concerned about people making a mistake and comparing this to a roof. That was Rav's way of explaining the Mishnah. And then we have Shmuel's way of explaining the Mishnah. And again, I'm going over it. We're going to have to go over it once or twice because you really need to remember this in order to understand page 15a. So the opinion of Shmuel is that both Reb Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, both Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Meir hold that if it's the same as the roof boards, if it's the 4 tefach, 4 handbreadths, which is approximately 12 inches, if it's those 12-inch planks that you're using for your schach, Shmuel says everyone agrees that that's not going to be kosher for schach rabbinically because it's so similar to a roof. The only question is if it's a little smaller than that, if it's 9 inches, if it's 3 handbreadths. 3 handbreadths between 3 and 4, between 9 inches and 12 inches, those type of planks, that's where there's an argument between Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir, because Reb Meir is concerned that even those are similar to a roof, and some people use smaller than 12 planks. There's a minority of people that use smaller planks for their roof, and they use these 9-inch ones or 10-inch ones. And because of that, I am making I believe the decree of not using planks for your schach is also on smaller, on anywhere from 9 inches and above. That would be anywhere from 3 tefach, 3 handbreadths and above. That would be very similar to a roof, and I would prohibit that. And Rabbi Yehuda argues and says, I'm not so worried about the minority of people, that they use. We don't care about the minority. The majority of people use 4 handbreadths planks. That is what I am concerned about, and that's where there's a decree. So that's the way Shmuel explains the Mishnah, and we learned earlier how Rav explained the Mishnah. Now that we know these facts, we're going to be able, hopefully, to understand the Mishnah a little better in the Gemara here on page 15. David, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, most people that are going to build a roof of a house, they're going to try not to have any gaps. Whereas the roof of a sukkah, they're going to build it with gaps.
So first of all, that's true. There is going to be a slight difference, and I'm guessing that in the olden days, there probably were always gaps, and they would fill in those gaps somehow with bubble gum or something, or who knows what. But the fact that that you're building your sukkah and you're not filling in the gaps, David is asking that would show that it's not like a roof of a house that people will remember. People should know that this is not that a roof of a house isn't kosher because you didn't fill in. There's a reason why you're not filling in the gaps. That's an interesting point that you're bringing up. In other words, the fact that you didn't fill in the gaps should show that that you know the difference, and therefore it should be good enough. That's what you're asking. That's an interesting point. That shouldn't that be enough? And obviously, the Gemara is saying no. The fact that you didn't fill in the gaps, people don't see those fill-ins in their roof, I guess, and therefore it wouldn't be enough of a proof that that people will remember that this is kosher and that's not kosher. It wouldn't be enough of it wouldn't make such a mark in their mind that this is kosher and that's not kosher. I guess you don't really see those fill in, that part of the roof you don't really see. Yes, Jeffrey, you're muted, so you got to unmute yourself, maybe the bottom left button.
So it's still supposed to be a temporary house, right? And we have an expression for that. So the closer it looks to a regular house, the less of that impression we're giving. And that's why in the time of the Sakana, they brought up the fact that they used the bigger boards to sort of fool the authorities. They wouldn't suspect that they were trying to observe the halal. So it seems like we really require that the shade be more than the light, but it still has to have some light. It still has to have some opening that's big enough to show that this is a sukkah.
So are you asking a question? Or are you talking about David's point?
I'm talking to David's point. And that's why we also read that if you put those boards on the side of the sukkah, it really looks more like the wall of the sukkah. And so there seems to be, there's more requirements than just that you have the board be slightly less than 4 handbreadths. There has to be something else that shows that it's a sukkah. And some of that would be using other leaves or whatever in the spaces, or using purposely smaller boards than you would use on a house, or making sure that there is some light coming through, so that it's a house that is impermanent.
Are you talking in Reb Meir's view or Reb Yehuda's view? In the Mishnah on page 14a, and in Rab's way of explaining it, or Shmuel's way of explaining it.
Yeah.
And
here, so when we go down halfway down the page, Rab Papa, Kamayesh, Bahen Arba Divrei HaKol Psula, Pachos Bishlosha Divrei HaKol Keshera.
Yeah, so that's in Shmuel's way of explaining it, that the whole argument is between 3 and 4. And so what you're saying is that if you hold that you're allowed to use 3 handbreadth boards, which is Reb Yehuda's view, you would also need to make more recognition that it's a sukkah, I'm not sure that you need to. I mean, obviously, it has to be a kosher sukkah, and
Right.
as we know, the rain has to be able to fall through. But more than that, I don't know if you have to go out of your way to make it more recognizable. According to Reb Yehuda, a 3 handbreadth schach is kosher, and that will be fine. Obviously, you're not going to nail it in and make it impossible for rain to get through, but I don't know that you have to go out of your way to make it recognizable.
Okay.
It sounded from what you were saying that you need to go out of your way to make it recognizable. I'm not sure that that's true. I'm
Right.
questioning that.
Right.
Okay.
But okay, so if we go back to 14 and look beyond that too, it does say after that, the litnihu or something like that, shiur markov lo gazrin. What does that mean? Is the markov the place space between?
What that means is that where do these calculations come from? Where does the number 4 handbreadths come from? And where does the number 3 handbreadths come from? So the Gemara had said that why is 4 a significant amount according to Rabbi Yehuda, and 3, 3 isn't, and according to Rabbi Meir, 3 is a significant amount. So the Gemara is there explaining and touches on the reasoning behind it, which according to Rabbi Yehuda, since it's not 4 handbreadths, it's not considered a significant size, and so we're not going to make a decree that it's similar to a roof and prohibit, because the size 4 is a significant size. It would make, people will consider it a significant type of covering, and that they will compare it to a roof. If it's less than 4, it's not a significant size in halacha. Even in halacha, the Gemara is saying, it's a 4 handbreadths is a halachic significant size. According to Reb Meir, he says no, 3 is a significant size because it has left the rules of Lavud, and once it's 3, we're going to say that would have we're going to make a decree that it's similar to a roof. It has a certain significance, and if it would be empty space, whatever, it creates if it would be empty space, the law of Lavud would stop. It would end there. The law of Lavud would not kick in, and therefore, we're going to consider 3 the size. So that's basically the argument there for if it's the size is 3 or 4.
Okay.
I don't think anyone is really emphasizing if you have to go out of your way to make it clear. In other words, the size itself, that itself is enough.
Okay.
That it would be kosher according to Rebbe Yehuda. Okay, so getting back to our Mishnah here, we just mentioned these 2 major points before we do the Gemara and the Mishnah and the Gemara. Yes, David.
Yeah, as far as similar to a house or not similar to a house, the fact that you should be able to say it's not similar to a house if it's 3 walls, because most people are not going to build a house out of 3 walls.
That's a good point. It's a good point that it seems that it's that you can tell that you're not in a house, you're in a sukkah, but at the same time, the question is, would you be allowed to build a sukkah with 4 walls? So what are you going to do then? Some sukkahs have 4 walls, and then you're using these planks that are very similar to a house. A person might say, well, I'm in a house, but it has a wooden roof. It's not like the what do they call the IHOP roofs that are metal. This is a wooden roof. I should be I'm fine. This is a good sukkah. If it was a metal roof, that's a problem. But it's a wooden roof. This should be kosher. The sukkah is the same. My rabbi has a wooden. He has wood on his sukkah. It's good. What's wrong with my house? My house is good enough also for a sukkah. So a person could make such a mistake. You know what I mean? You see them using the schach. So in other words, the fact that you have 3 walls, you have 4 walls, the question is this kosher schach or not? If it works for a sukkah, could my house work as well? Am I going to mistakenly think that my house is just as good? Okay, so we've got these two points. Now we're going to start the Mishnah. Page 15a, the top of the page is the new Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, Tikra, a roof, she'ein aleha ma'aziva, that does not have on it the typical clay or mud that they would normally smear the roof with this extra type of material or substance, I should say. And this sukkah doesn't have that. Because it doesn't have it on it, this roof doesn't have any extra substance smeared on it. It doesn't have a ma'aziva. And because of that, you may say, well, can I use this for a sukkah? Is it good enough? Do I have to do something to it? We're talking about a typical, it's typical boards. It's a roof, a tikra, which is a roof. It has typical boards. What size are the typical boards? 4 hand breadths, which means about 12 inches approximately, give or take. So you have these 12-inch boards, and there's nothing smeared on it that could ruin it for schach. This is wood, comes from the ground. So the Mishnah seems to understand very clearly that the way it is now is not going to be a kosher sukkah. Why would it not be kosher the way it is now? The Mishnah is going to tell us what to do. What's wrong with it the way it is now? So what's wrong with it is that the way it's built is that it's built as a house, as a dwelling, as a this is a house built. This is built as a house. It's not built as a sukkah. The way a sukkah is built, it's built for shade. A house is built for all different types of purposes. And if it's built as a house, that's not going to be kosher. And if you have in mind you're using it for a sukkah now, that's not going to kosher. That's not going to make it work, because you can't kosher a sukkah. You can break it down and rebuild it somehow, which maybe we'll see how that works, to what extent you need to break it down and rebuild it in a kosher way. But you can't just kosher it. And so your thought of using it for shade now, oh, it's sukkahs, okay, now I'm using this was built as a house, that's not going to work. You can't just use it now, have in mind the right way, and it's kosher. So, and again, the source for that is Tasa V'loimin Ha'asu. It has to be built kosher, and you can't just sort of like make it kosher or kosher it. So it's a tikra she'ein aleha ma'aziva. It's a roof that doesn't have on it anything smeared, any of this mud or clay or plaster. No plaster plastered over it. And so it's just wood. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says that there's an argument Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. How do you correct this? How do you actually make it? How do you break it and rebuild it in a kosher way? So Rabbi Yehuda says that Beis Shammai Yomrim mefakfek, you detach this roof, each board, v'noitel achas mibenatayim, and you need to take one plank out. Every other plank has to be removed. Noitel achas, you take one out of in between the two, and then you take another one in between the next two, and another one in between the next two planks. And as long as you do that, and what the Mishnah's implying is that you would take out one plank and you'd put in its space, you would place kosher schach. So what you're doing is you're breaking number one is you took off the roof. That's mefakfek. You took the entire roof off. You detached the entire roof, and then you shook it. The way Rashi says is soiser umena'anea. You removed it and you shake it all of the pieces, and then you can put them back down. But you got to remove every other one. Remove every other plank, and you'll put in its place kosher schach. Now, what does this help? What do you think? What did we accomplish by removing, detaching it, and putting it back down? What did we accomplish now? You have your, let's say, your living room, and it was just it just had a wooden roof on it, or you have a porch. Maybe let's pick a case of a porch. Maybe it's more practical. You have a porch, and
my
your porch.
mother-in-law did this with her house in Queens. They had the porch out the back door.
Okay, so you have your porch, and it just has wood. You know, they did a very simple job when they built your house. And the porch, your house is good, but the porch, they just put wood, and it's very nice, a very nice, decent porch. And you want to use it for your sukkah. So, of course, it's not kosher for your sukkah as it is, because it was built as a real porch. But now you want to use it as a sukkah. It's a place just for shade. And that's your purpose, is to have like a hut there. And you're going to use it as a sukkah for the mitzvah. So what do you want to do? So you take off every piece of the roof, all the wood, and you can put it back down. You know, you shake it a little, remove it, and put it back down. And then, according to Beis Shammai, you actually have to remove every other one. Now, before we explain what you benefited, let's just see what Beis Hillel says. Beis Hillel says, you could do either or. You don't have to do both. The first opinion, Beis Shammai, it sounds like you have to do both. And Beis Hillel says, no, you could do either or. What is the either or? Either remove each piece and then just put them back down. Or what you can do is don't remove them at all. Leave them all attached and just take out every other one. But the ones that are there, leave. The in-between, the consecutive ones, leave. Don't remove them. And just remove every other one and put in its place kosher schach. So what are you accomplishing by these? According to Beis Shammai, you need to do both things. According to Beis Hillel, you just do the either or. You remove them all and then put them all back down, or just take one out in between of every other one you got to remove and put in its place kosher schach. What are you accomplishing? So again, what's the problem with this as a sukkah? The problem was that this sukkah is a house. It's not built as a sukkah. It's not built as a hut. It's built as a part of your house, part of the porch, whatever it is. And now you want to build it again, it doesn't have to be for the mitzvah, at least according to Beis Hillel, but it has to be meant for shade. And you built it as a house, not as a sukkah. So there's a problem, and you need to build it properly. And you can't just do some type of fix, because then it would be called tasev leimin ha'asui. You somehow koshered it, and it's not called built. So what you need to do is, let's say you remove all the pieces. Removing all the pieces and putting them back down, what do you think that helps? What does that do? What does that accomplish? Anyone?
You're rebuilding.
You rebuilt it. You took off the schach and you built it. And now, how did you build it? Did you build it for a house or for a sukkah? Now you're putting it down for a sukkah. So the walls we're not worried about, as Isaac told us earlier, that the walls is not what we're concerned about. The walls could be built for a house. That's no problem. The walls could be there from before. The issue is the schach, the roof. That's the whole issue that we're dealing with. And the schach was built for a house before, and now you're building it for a sukkah. How are you doing that? Because you removed it, put it back down, or however much you removed it. You lifted everything, you detached it, shook it, and then put it back down. So you've accomplished at least fix that you've built it now for a sukkah. Yes, Mordechai.
Yes, I mean, it doesn't make any physical change, but it is symbolic. I mean, similar to Rambam, one parak a day, we're learning about the avoda and the Beis Hamikdash, and there were various items that were picked up, waved, and then put back down, and that didn't change them physically, but it still had some symbolism to it.
Are you talking about tnufa?
Right.
Waving. Okay, yeah, interesting comparison. Yeah, to think about that one. That's an interesting point. Well, here, what you're actually doing is it is changing it for the in other words, how is it built? What's it built as? You're doing an action, and the action is giving it a sense of meaning, of purpose, giving it a sense of purpose. What is the purpose of this hut? It's built as so it does take, in this scenario, you're actually giving it you're giving it a title, you're giving it a purpose. So you're calling it now a sukkah. What happens if you remove every other one? What does that do? So if you remove every other one and you put kosher schach, so it could be that itself is called rebuilding it. In other words, you removed every other one. You're putting in kosher schach. So are you building it for a sukkah now? Yeah. There's non-kosher schach there from before. Okay. But that non-kosher schach, it's still, it's not called a roof. You're missing every other one. And now you're putting on a kosher schach. It's called, you're putting on a kosher, you're building it in a kosher way. However, the issue that we will deal with is, what about the fact, let's pick, for example, you're using the old wood, and you're just using that. You lifted it off, and Beis Hillel says you can be mefakfek, and that's good enough. You just detached it, waved it, dropped it back down, and now you're using that. What about the fact that you've got these boards that are 4 hand breaths? These are 4 hand breadth boards. So you're using them for schach? Is that really going to work for your schach? You have these boards that are 4 hand breadths wide. So the previous Mishnah, the way Rav explained it, was that Rabbi Yehuda has no problem with that. He says, I have no problem. 4 hand breadth wide is no problem for me. I don't believe in this whole similarity between a sukkah, if you use the board for a sukkah, and you're going to think, oh, I can use my house as well. I don't believe in that. People are not going to make such a mistake. And therefore, I have no problem. You can use these boards. Use big boards. You could use small boards. I have no problem, Rabbi Yehuda says. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, this is not an issue, having these boards, the way Rav explains Rabbi Yehuda in the previous Mishnah, because Reb Meir is the one who has a problem with the boards. Reb Meir is the one who says, no, you can't use 4 hand breadth boards, which would be about 12-inch boards. Rabbi Yehuda has no problem with boards, and therefore the first way, mefakfek, is no problem. And obviously, the other option is also not a problem. Take every other one, and you put on kosher schach. So that would also, there would be 2 options according to Beis Hillel how to do it, and Rabbi Yehuda has no problem with these boards. What about Shmuel's way of explaining the previous Gemara, the previous Mishnah? Shmuel's way of explaining the previous Mishnah is that everyone holds a 4 handbreadth board is a problem. The whole debate in the previous Mishnah was a board that's in between 3 handbreadths and 4 handbreadths. That's where there's a debate in the previous Mishnah. But if it's 4 handbreadths, and that's the way we're understanding a typical roof, are 4 handbreadth boards, how are you using these 4 handbreadth boards on your sukkah? How are you using them? The fact is, these are called Nesarim. These are called boards that are prohibited, even according to Rebbe Yehuda in the previous Mishnah, the way Shmuel explains it, that everyone agrees that there's a decree against using boards. So this, we'll see in the Gemara how Shmuel's going to explain it. The way Rav explains it, it seems very simple. We're dealing only with one issue, the issue of Kasev Leimin Asui. We're not dealing with the issue of using boards, and because there's no problem with it according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Reb Meir. Now we're going to jump to Reb Meir. Reb Meir Oimer. We're in the Mishnah now on the 4th line. Reb Meir Oimer noitel achas mibenatayim ve'enoi mefakfek. Reb Meir says that mefakfek doesn't work, and Reb Meir has a problem with using boards. And that we saw in the previous Mishnah. Even according to Rav's way of explaining it. If they're 4 handbreadth boards, if they're 12 inches, that's a problem according to Reb Meir. So we know why he says ve'enoi mefakfek. You can't just disconnect these boards and use them for schach, because boards are not kosher schach, according to Reb Meir. And Reb Meir says that no, you can't do mefakfek, but what you can do is noitel achas mibenatayim. You take every other board out, and you will be able to kosher, to build your sukkah in a kosher way.
And you can sit under those planks.
So that's going to be
plank. You could sit under those planks.
We're going to talk about that tomorrow. I don't want to get into that. It's a little complicated.
Oh yeah.
We'll talk about it tomorrow, about sitting under the plank. Just 1 second. I think David had a question first. Okay. Yeah, David.
Yeah, in the Steinsaltz, he says mefakfek about moving. He says, according to Rambam, it means removing the nails holding the boards in place. I thought you're not allowed to use nails to hold the boards in place because it's Mekabel Tuma.
So the Rambam is explaining what does it mean disconnecting and moving it around. It means you're removing those nails. So removing the nails,
and now it's stopped.
You have no problem now. The problem was before, maybe it had nails attaching it. You're removing the nails, or you're disconnecting the nails, and you're not using those nails at all. So now it's no problem. There is a discussion of what exactly. There's a Rush and a Rambam about mefakfek. Is it removing the nails, waving it, moving it around? But basically, that's the Rashi seems to say both. He says that mefakfek is soiser umenanea. He seems to say both things, that you detach it and then you move it around, you wave it. Okay, Victor had a question. Victor wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out the wording, because does it mean every other board, or it just means one board from one out of the total amount of boards, and then that's it? In other words, how do we see the wording means every other one, or just because one from among them means every other? Is that what we're saying? Or
so there really are there's really 2 ways of learning it, which are both part of it has to do with the question is how much unkosher schach invalidates your sukkah. When you have non-kosher schach on your sukkah, how much of it do you need to invalidate? So we know empty space invalidates a sukkah 3 handbreadths. Non-kosher schach invalidates a sukkah at 4 handbreadths, right? But there is an opinion that non-kosher schach invalidates a sukkah only with 4 cubits. So if you learn the 4 cubits option,
8 feet.
So if what is that?
8 feet,
8 feet,
cubits.
4 cubits. There is such a view. You'll have to stay tuned for page 17 and 18, but there is such a view. And basically, depending on how you learn it, there are 2 ways of explaining this noitel achas mibein tayim. If you want, you could look in this Rashi. Actually, we can learn the Rashi. If you want to learn the Rashi inside, because both Isaac and I think Victor will enjoy this. It's the last Rashi on the Mishnah. Reb Meir Omer. It's on the side of your Gemaras, the right side of the page. So you have the Rashi, the inner part of the page. So the last Rashi on the Mishnah, which is probably about 20, maybe 20 lines from the top. Yeah, say about in that ballpark. Reb Meir So Reb Meir says you have to take, this is the final opinion of the Mishnah, that you can't do the mafakfek, you can't remove it, detach it, and wave it, because that's not going to help you, because you can't use boards. Shane Pikbuk Mayoloi, the removal of these, detaching of these boards are not going to help, because they're boards. What are you going to do? Put them back on your schach and use Reb Meir L'Taimei. Reb Meir goes according to his reason. The Amar Ein Masach and Mesarim, he said in the previous Mishnah on page 14a that you can't use these boards for schach. By day psal shebi natayim iskashra. But if you remove every other one, or remove the and put in its place psal, which means the refuse of the vineyard, which basically means branches. If you use psal instead of boards in between, miskashra, the sukkah will be kosher. Shmuel, and according to Shmuel, this is where you gotta listen up. According to Shmuel, the Amar Lakamon, that says later on, schach puzzle biarba be'emtza, that the schach puzzle, invalid schach, invalidates your sukkah if it's 4 handbreadths in the middle of the sukkah, not on the side of the sukkah. On the side of the sukkah we have special laws, but called doifen akuma. But in the middle of the sukkah, the schach that's invalid will invalidate your sukkah with 4 handbreadths. So mitukma kedeprecious loel, it'll be explained as the Gemara explained on the previous page, the neve shnei psalim be'emtza, that you would have in the middle of your sukkah, you would have 2 areas next to each other that you would have kosher schach on them. So ve'ein ba elaches amos. So what would happen is that on each side of your sukkah, what you're doing is you're having 4 handbreadths of invalid schach called a board. Then you'd have 4 handbreadths of kosher schach, then 4 handbreadths of an invalid schach called a board, then 4 handbreadths of kosher schach. And in the middle of your sukkah, if you did that on both sides of your sukkah, so you have invalid schach from the wall, and then some kosher schach, then invalid schach, then kosher schach, and all from the wall. And in the middle, you got 2 chunks of kosher schach. 4 handbreadths in 4 handbreadths equals 8 handbreadths of kosher schach. So your kosher sukkah is really just in the middle. That would be your real sukkah that you're allowed to dwell in. The sides would be problematic because you have these boards that are non-kosher schach, and we're going to call the sides of your sukkah a wall. And that would be the way we would explain it, according to Shmuel, that you're removing every other one, But the middle is the main thing that you're using for your schach. And in truth, you really don't need to remove every other one like Victor is hinting to, because you're using the sides as doifen akuma, as a wall. So you don't exactly need to remove every other one. You're really, the main thing is to remove the middle two. And if you remove the middle two, you have the sides or walls, and the middle two is your sukkah, and you've got a kosher, you rebuilt your sukkah in a kosher way, and you basically have this works this will work. This option will work if your sukkah is exactly 8 amos. If it gets bigger than that, you'll have to make new calculations, because the walls of your sukkah cannot extend on your schach more than 4 amos, and it'll create problems. So this would fit with an 8 amos sukkah, with an 8 cubit sukkah, and you have the laws of doifen akuma, and the walls would work all the way till the middle one, and in the middle you would remove the boards and make a sukkah. Now comes the next point, and this is what Isaac was. This is what I was mentioning to Isaac. Inami svira le karav, or it could be that Reb Meir holds like Rav, the Yamar Lakamon, that has an opinion later, which is an unknown view to a regular person, that schach puzzle, that invalid schach, is bein men hatzad, bein be'emtza, whether on the side, which that we are aware of, is 4 cubits. You could have invalid schach 4 cubits, but in the middle of the sukkah, even not on the side, you could have invalid schach up to 4 cubits. That's an unknown opinion, but this is Rav's view. It's not really known to the regular common folk, but there is such a view, and you would be able to have non-kosher schach. So you have these boards, and they're only 4 handbreadths. You could have a lot of them next to each other, and it would be kosher schach until you reach a certain point. So it says that that wouldn't be a problem. The boards in the middle do not ruin it, because you don't have the measurement of 4 cubits next to each other. So according to this way of working out the case would be that you have every other board is removed. You can have a big sukkah. You need to remove every other board, because if you don't, you're going to end up having too many boards next to each other that will add up to 4 cubits. So does it mean plural, remove every other board? It depends how big your sukkah is. But if you have a big sukkah, you would need to remove every other board, so that you don't end up having a problem of the boards adding up to 4 handbreadths. And the other option is you would just remove the middle 2, and you would be able to have a kosher sukkah. Again, that would fit in the way that would fit if your sukkah is only 8 cubits. That's the way it would work. That your sukkah would be 8 cubits. You could remove every other one, or you could just theoretically get away with removing the middle 2. But the understanding of the statement of Reb Meir is you remove one in between the others and every other one, and that's how you kosher. That's how you make the sukkah built in a kosher way. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Let's just go over the Mishnah outside, because it does get a little technical and confusing. So we've got this case where you have your porch that was built part of your house, and you want to make that into a sukkah. Basically, you got to remove the whole. You got to somehow rebuild it. What are the 2 options? Well, according to Beis Shammai, there's only one option. You got to do everything. You got to remove all of the boards on the top, and then just put back every other one, and fill the empty holes with kosher schach. That's the way Beis Shammai is going to understand. This is Rabbi Yehuda's view in explaining Beis Shammai. In Rabbi Yehuda's view, explaining Beis Hillel is that you could you excuse me, you could either remove every other one, or you could remove the entire roof and put it all back down. That's Rabbi Yehuda's view in Beis Hillel. And then Reb Meir says you only have one option. And the only option is removing every other one. So if you think about the halacha side of it, it's pretty easy. There's two options. According to Beis Shammai, you got to do both. According to Beis Hillel, you do either one. According to Reb Meir, you can only do one option. And if you want to just summarize the Mishnah, right? The case is you have this roof. How do you make it kosher now? You either have two options or you only have one option, and you could either and different opinions are basically telling us is you have both options, you have only one option, or do you need to do both of these things? But that's basically how to make your sukkah a kosher sukkah. Now the Gemara, Bishleima Beis Hillel. The Gemara says it's good according to Beis Hillel. Taimayu mishum tasav leiman asu. The reason of Beis Hillel is that how do you get away with using these boards after you remove them and then put them back down? The problem was tasav leiman asu. So you had a problem that you built the sukkah in a non-kosher way. And you can't just somehow kosher it. You have to build it kosher. So how do you build it kosher? You remove imafakfek ovid lemaisa. If you remove all of them, you put them back down. So sounds pretty good. You've now done an act of rebuilding it. If you remove every other one, and then you fill in the empty spaces with kosher schach, it's also ovid bemaisa. If you removed every other one, you did a maisa, you did an act that you're building the sukkah from scratch, so to speak. You're rebuilding it from the beginning, not exactly from scratch, but you're building it from you're rebuilding the roof, I should say, and therefore it's not a problem of tasev leimanosis. So you have these two options, and you've accomplished what you need to. Ela Beis Shammai my taimai. What is the reason, according to Beis Shammai, that you need to have both things? You need to remove all of them, wave them, put them back down, and then to remove one from in between each. Why do you need both things? So, if it's the problem of that we just mentioned, that you can't just kasher a sukkah, you got to build it. So, b'chodasagi, one of these options should be good. Either leave them there, don't remove all of them, only take out every other one. That's good enough. Now you rebuilt the sukkah. Or remove all of them and put them all back down. Why do you need both things? The chodasagi, one is enough. And then the Gemara says, you're going to tell me because there's a problem that it's gzeiras tikra, imishum gzeiras tikra. If your problem is that it is a gzeira of it's similar to a roof, and we don't want people to make mistakes, think that to dwell in such a sukkah with a plank of wood, they could dwell in their house, and it would also be a kosher sukkah. It's a gzeira of tikra. So if you're going to say such a thing, sagi, if you remove one in between every other one, so that should exempt you from this problem, because you will not have a sukkah that is relying on these boards for kosher schach. Instead, you're relying on the kosher schach that's in between each of these boards, and that should be good enough. Your noitalach has been a tayyib, and as we explained in Rashi, you know how you could get away with that. So it should be okay to have, this kosher schach, and you have a few of these boards, no problem. That should be good enough. Why do you also have to remove even the ones that are there? You really need to remove all the ones that are there and take them off? Why should you need to do that? You're considered to have rebuilt the sukkah by removing every other one and then putting kosher tzchach there. So the Gemara says, you're right. And the Gemara says, you have to read the Mishnah a little differently than we read it. The Gemara says, Li'olam really, mishum gzeras tikra. What you just said is correct. That the problem is that we are concerned about a gzera, the decree of a roof, that it's similar to a roof, and therefore you can't use these boards for schach. V'hachi ka'amri, and this is what they are saying. The Beis Shammai opinion, Beis Shammai, the house of Shammai, the scholars of the yeshiva of Shammai, they are saying as follows: Aval pi shemafakvek, even if you remove all of them and wave them, so to speak, rebuild it, put it back down, that doesn't work. You got to take one from in between them, every other one. If you do that, then that'll be good. And if you don't do that, it won't be good. And so the way the Gemara understands it is you need to remove every other one, and if you don't, it won't work. And so what Beis Shammai is really saying is that you don't have two options and you have to do both options. That's not correct. Beis Hillel holds you have two options. Beis Shammai says one of those options won't work. Even if you do it, it doesn't help. You need to do the other option. You need to do noitel achas mibein time. That's what you need to do. And that the Gemara is satisfied with, because the logic behind it is that you're not allowed to use boards for schach. Now, the way mafakfek works is that what are you doing? You're detaching them and putting them back on. And if you're detaching them, putting them back on, then you're basically using them as schach. So that can't work. So the Gemara's understanding, no, that's not that. There's no way that's going to work. But the other option of mafakvek, that will work. And the other option of noitlach benatayim, that will work. And so all you got to do is really, and so the way the Gemara is explaining the Mishnah now is that Beis Shammai is saying mafakvek, it's not doing nothing. But if noitlach benatayim, then you're able to. Mafakvek doesn't do anything, but noitlach benatayim, then it'll work. You take one out in between all the others, every other one, then you'll be able to. Oh, I'm sorry, my time is up. But let's see what time it was. But so if you do that, then it'll be good enough. And that's basically the new understanding of the Mishnah, is that Beis Shammai is not saying you need to do two things. He's saying that one of the two options doesn't work, and you need to make sure to do the other option. So that's the conclusion of the way we're explaining Beis Shammai, that he's really saying you need to remove one from the others. Now, the is going to ask, if that's the opinion of Beis Shammai, how is that different than Reb Meir? Reb Meir seems to say that. Reb Meir seems to say exactly that. So that's the next question of the Gemara, which we'll get to tomorrow, Be'ezus Hashem. Okay, we're going to stop here and have a wonderful day.